Okay, welcome everybody. We got the great witness here, Kevin. Kevin's giving us viewpoints here from the real side to help us to see, just to see more. He's bringing back lots of information about what's going on the other side, you could say. He has these experiences that are really incredible. I mean, most people dream just a little bit, but he brings back these experiences that are really valuable for us to look at and see both here and the real side. It's really the same thing.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the NUADVENTURIS series. We will be sharing real side experiences from the GALAXSEEERS Skype group. This real side experience would begin with me in the company of a group, and we were in a street setting. Nothing much occurring at this point, everything seeming all rather ordinary. But then I was to accompany a woman up this vast mountain or hill, which had a kind of netting applied to it that assisted our ascension, as it afforded us hand and footholds, and up the mountain we would clamber, for it was so steep as to be practically vertical. As with many experiences on the real side that feature hills and mountains, if the individual is indeed on their process of becoming more aware with the real intent to recognize the is, then such mountain or hill ascensions do represent this process, an upward journey from what we have resigned ourselves to in restricting creation to a climb that has us being, seeing, and becoming aware of more. The journey upward is of course for our literal personal selves consideration, as the isness is everything, and is here and now, a true reality that just is, that we must recognize, aside from a simulated creation of opposites that we encase our awareness within. And any illusion of motion or distance applies to a creation only, as we process cause to effect ideas into experience through the agreements of the consciousness that effect simulated virtual reality worlds that present in this way. Creation, an overall comparison to recognize the true reality by, as everything of creation, all the ideas that comprises its construction, is what the is not. My impression was that the woman we were following was another aware individual, and at the time of the sharing of this experience, Dwayne would see her as being Ava. Dwayne often describes how that as we climb the mountain of the is, as we recognize it, or at least something of the true reality, or what we have discovered and been shown that references it, that then the harder part is coming back down again, to present this reality in creation. For becoming fully aware is one thing, but to recognize the is requires that we earn our recognition by the promoting and sharing of the is, and extending the opportunity to others, as everything equals itself, and the extent to which we take the risk to see and be more, and the extent to which we stand real with the isness life is, which is a standing in support of this true reality, and also share it with others, dictates the extent to which the is shares with us our recognition of it. So we may very well see this as demonstrated by scaling the is mountain, as it were, perhaps gleaning an insight or a real side experience that required a level of awareness and recognition, but then we rather come back down the mountain to share what we have recognized and present it in creation. It's not that we're reduced in our mountain scaling position as we descend it, but more we must switch back and forth from the nowness of our real awareness and what we recognize of the is from this position that is the isness reality to a creation and the personal self, and convey it through the cause and effect mechanics of creation to make it available for others in whatever ways we decide. Why there was netting that aided our process could simply be that through the references and the ever-present assistance of Dwayne, Ava, and the real guides on the real side and the physical, this journey, this sharing is made easier, as they always are on hand to give us our demonstrations and experiences on the real side, and their insights and views also from the physical, with Dwayne and Ava very much being guides, though operating in creation, which allow us better to interpret what we are shown and become more aware as a consequence. In the next scene, what had been a relatively ordinary street setting seemed to have deteriorated into a broken and desolate place, and mostly under water, as though the creational physical level had taken a quick jump from cause and effect relative stability to a point in the so-called future where it had severely deteriorated. I was still with the same group at this point, and we were negotiating our way through this broken place, avoiding the water and precariously navigating through all the rubble, going in single file along narrow walkways and squeezing between great chunks of broken building. We would be wise to avoid the water also, for it seemed full of creatures, monsters, and the like, that would try and snag us with their tentacles and teeth. They desired to drag us into the waters. It was as though we were still in creation, in a more advanced stage of its agreed-upon cause and effect demise, but still keeping our heads above the waters, as though maintaining our awareness, focus, and real intent, as creation continuously sought to snare us through agreements and drag us under, to absorb us back into our personal selves and creation, the waters representing the psych realms, and to keep above them as we were doing, demonstrated us retaining our focus and connection to the true reality, despite the tumultuous circumstances. Among the creatures were large malformed spiders also, spinning their webs everywhere, and we were especially cautious to avoid these. Spiders always seem to be representing the dark force minions on the real side, or entities from the lower astral that seem to take this form as one of the many they assume. And here they were, still operating in this deteriorated physical level, trying to snare us with their webs, which undoubtedly represented potential tap lines from any agreements they could bait us into making. In the final scene, our group had become less, and with me included, our number was diminished to 3. Creation had deteriorated even further. Nothing of any land or structure that could provide sanctitude was available, just an endless murky water that stretched as far as the eye could see. A pervading dark inky gloom had settled over the scene too, like a thick fog of blackness. This blackness is frequently seen on the real side, through the real awareness by many individuals, and according to the agreement construction of the personal self, dictates the extent to which it can be seen by the unaware, as mostly the bubbles of self-conviction prevent the simulator from being seen as it actually is, as it is being decided to be, that being a deteriorated and continuing to deteriorate state due to the agreements of restriction through the overall consciousness. A great enveloping darkness is gradually engulfing this simulator, which represents the unconsciousness and restriction of awareness that's taking place, even for the individual that has no awareness. The blackness of the skies at night are an indication of this unaware unconsciousness. For once the night sky was full of light and absent of blackness. And the black holes also are a manifestation of the unconsciousness and agreement to a restriction. The forging of black holes that suck in matter and light as a symptom of a simulator in a demise, as it slowly is impacting and imploding on itself. Our group had, however, secured a kind of a makeshift boat, although it was rather crude and always threatened to sink. I had a pair of oars, and would be the one tasked with steering the boat and ensuring it remain above the waters, the others of the group in agreement with my decisions as to our direction. So still, we were maintaining a position and focus of real intent that was assuring that we were not absorbed back into creation, even at this 11th hour creational demise point. And we had a destination, nothing precise, but we had to travel west, it would seem, and I had a small compass by which I could ensure our heading was true, as there were no landmarks or anything other than the darkness and the water that we could use to navigate by, and so off we went in that direction, slowly and laboriously, lest the crude boat sink, for it was really just a broken piece of wood. So it rather seems as though it is another demonstration of how the new friends continue to share the references of the ears and opportunity of becoming more aware right up until the last conceivable moment, where perhaps we reach a point where it is a time to extricate ourselves from a teetering on the brink of oblivion simulator, assuming our recognition and awareness and real intent allows us such an option. The view we have on the real side always demonstrates the culmination of what is being decided in creation at the moment we are afforded such a view, as real side experiences such as these very much express as this isness, and what is the final result then of certain decisions and agreements. As an example, where people are seen as reptilian on the real side, and yet may not become so until a future lifetime as cause and effect takes them there, or, as in this case, overall simulator situations, which will be so according to how overall agreement stands at the moment we have these future views, the culmination of decision. Then it rather pans out as experience to that point in creational cause and effect. But of course, agreements and decision can change. So as we see these doomsday-like simulator situations, it isn't that they are set in stone. It's just that this is where the agreements overall stand in the moment we have these real side future views. At the time I shared this, Dwayne would suggest those in the galactic group at the time take heed of this real side experience. That as my group had diminished in size, he saw it as indicating the possibility of some of the galactic group stepping back, and a month or so later, Kelsey, Henry, and Eric would indeed do so, and Dwayne would say later how he saw suggestions and hints on the real side also that this might come to pass, as we always demonstrate our intentions on the real side for all to see. In the last scene, I was in this deteriorating creational place no longer, but in a kind of a bright, gleaming, and high-tech sort of facility, and I was securing a new boat, it seemed. There were a range of boats available, priced from cheap to expensive, and although I could afford any of these boats, I elected to choose one that fell about halfway along the scale price-wise. Maybe this was a place where I was choosing a new body vehicle, best suited for the circumstances required of it, so perhaps I had transitioned from the physical, and what would demonstrate better a body vehicle that I would be using and aligning through the 5 bodies of it with the real intent of my real awareness, to keep above the psych realms of creation that tend to be represented as a great body of water than a boat. Maybe the creation I had been in had deteriorated to the point where remaining there had become impossible, and my physical vehicle had been destroyed. Maybe the simulator I had vacated, or had to, due to the circumstances where it had imploded. Perhaps then I was preparing to return to creation, to maybe another creational simulator, as there are endless simulators, with my unfinished real purpose business, to carry on with my process of becoming more aware. Physical creation provides the best place for awareness, as it is far more intense experience-wise due to the density of it in relation to other life levels, and thus better for our created comparisons to recognize the is from. And my awareness allowed that I had the choosing of a body vehicle regardless of its price, of its quality. The clay, if you will, we have available for each lifetime body vehicle is according to that which we have made available for ourselves through our choices and decisions. Poor decision and life choices equaling less clay, and perhaps then less capable a vehicle. And so I must have used my lifetime beneficially with the whole of life, as I had the full range of whatever I required available to forge my next vehicle, to continue on with my process in creation. Seems wherever I was going required a vehicle only halfway along the scale, so that was all that was necessary with my vehicle to accomplish what I needed in my next position. But we're always the decider, and regardless of what's presented on the real side, it's a view, a demonstration by life, of potential options given the circumstances, and we are not resigned to anything if we choose differently. At that moment, as things stood then, with this real side experience, it suggested I would lack perhaps the recognition to stand with the true reality of my real awareness, to supersede the need for creation, that further simulated creational positions and body vehicles were required to complete my awareness, as it is a long and arduous journey to get through creation and our personal selves, and we go about it in our own way and speed, and putting a time limit on it is rather nonsensical.
Things, the way things are going with the agreement, yeah, the demise of the planet, well, you can see where it's going, but again, it doesn't have to be that way. Everything's always in flux. Free will is always active, so it can make a turnaround, but we'll see about the planet and its conditions. I saw the netting in your first part of your experience, maybe the references as you're going up the mountain or the hill there, the netting to help you get up there, or the references we use to help us with our awareness. And just a funny story about, you mentioned Kelsey. Yeah, one day Kelsey and I were talking with Dwayne, and I don't remember exactly what he was talking about, but after he got through, well, basically he was saying not many people make it. And then after he finished and went away, we both looked at each other and we both said, we're screwed. Because this takes a lot this takes a lot. And like you said, Kevin, like there's no guarantee that we're gonna make it. You know, once it's time to get off the planet, and it's like we've done all we can. It's no guarantee for anything. And even Dwayne says that. I remember him saying about certain things for himself, you know, there's no guarantee even for him. Because life is so big and there's so much going on, and there's so much we don't see, that we just have to keep alert all the time, every minute, to keep up with it. basically. And I see it, as I get more aware how unaware I am. But it's okay. At the same time, it's okay. It's because I feel, my intent's the right place, and I'm doing the best I can to keep up. So even though I see all the unawareness that I have, as I say, the more aware I get, the bigger it gets, life gets. But it's okay because you're in a way you're taken care of no matter where you are, as long as you have that intent to be what you are, who you are.
Well, just to say that intent is very important. And I remember also Dwayne saying that your focus is your intent. What has your attention? What is your focus? What are you focused on? That is your intent. And the intent being the heart of yourself. And I think Kevin, you mentioned that when you go off of the mountain, it's not necessarily that you forfeit the process. You just go back to, because it's climbing the mountain, and then you go back down to share what it is that you had. I had an experience like that. I was literally climbing a mountain, and I noticed I got caged inside of this little like box that was like had a bunch of fences around it, and I was like, well, this isn't gonna work. So I leaped from the mountain, my position at the mountain, I leaped all the way back down to the bottom. I started climbing again. And so this just to little reference there with that as well.
It's just ongoing. Everything we do here, that's the neat thing about life. It's just ongoing, and it will always be here. It doesn't go away. It's always on. So we always get another chance. There's no guarantee for anything, but still, at the same time, where you are, the better off you are wherever you are, which is now. So it's just a matter of keeping up with things, and it's really not that hard. I notice the hard part is just to me, it's just being the way you articulate it to other people and share. That's like the challenge here, because you're okay with yourself, but actually it's a natural process to share this so that everybody can benefit. I notice the personal self at the same time benefits too. We talk about the personal self disappearing eventually, Dwayne does, but at the same time though, it enhances the personal self so it can survive better to relate to the real awareness, which is to the real us and to the isness. So it's not like it's going to be, you still have it because you're using it for a purpose. So take care of it, and you can have like your heart's desire or your dreams, whatever, you can have that. That's so cool about this. Your heart's desire, you can actually have that. And whatever that means to you, whether it's in the personal self or the real awareness, how you see that, but you can have anything you want in creation. So it would be the personal self's heart's desire, but you can have that. Just have to figure it out. But especially it's enhanced if you can align yourself with the real awareness and this isness that just is, then it makes it so much more so. But Dwayne talks about eventually the way he sees it, he's just going to disappear into the ethers, his personal self, because eventually you won't need it, and you'll just be just like the air. Although you have a choice, all the time, and the real guides have kept their so-called personal awareness to share, and others have gone on. So it's a big world out there.
I have a question for Kevin, if that's all right.
Sure, of course.
Yeah. Well, it has to do with a video that you put out yesterday I wanted to talk to you about it last night, but I finally fell asleep. So the question basically has to do with something you said on the video about the fact that we're heading towards kind of a personal automation that we're not really expecting, basically, where everybody's going to be controlled from a basically from a quantum artificial intelligence. I remember you saying something about being offered a choice to go into a whole different kind of body and actually have a connection that way, as opposed to the way the elite are proposing taking us all over, which has a lot to do with the vaccines, by the way, but I'm sure you know that. The question basically is, did you actually get confronted? Were you asked if you wanted to get an immortal body? Did somebody propose that to you? Because you said it's different programming, where your intimation was that basically you would not be under the control of the beings trying to take over this world.
Well, a robotic body is no different from the bodies we have now. They're simply a vehicle for our awareness to inhabit, in which we can have our experiences in creation, through which we recognize these through the comparisons that they provide. And so what I was shown on various real side experiences was, there have been a number of them, in fact, over the last year. And it seems that for the individuals who have the real intent and are standing real with the guys and Dwayne, and are embracing of their real purpose, and they're endeavoring to recognize these, and they have no personal self agendas or anything of that nature, then it seems that the possibility will be made available by which they can assume far more resilient body forms, because obviously, as things are continuing to deteriorate through all the agreements that make it so, with all the pollution, the 5G, the Wi-Fi, etc., it's going to weigh very heavy on our biological bodies, which are somewhat fragile and very susceptible to all these pollutions and poisons. And so, in order to, and the fact that we still have a lot to do, and the idea is we are to remain here for a number of years yet, we'll be very possibly we're going to be having to deal with these pollutions and these rather adverse conditions. And so that was simply an option being made available, that we would be able to assume for more resilient body forms, and it seemed it would make more sense that they were more mechanical, because obviously then they are a bit more resilient than sort of biological flesh and blood bodies. But as you said, the difference is that the controller's agenda is, of course, to robotize everybody through the nanobots already present in every biological body vehicle now. Then the 5G will activate these nanoparticles, which will then robotize the human race. And then the agenda of the dark forces was then to control everybody through the AI system. If they control the AI system in that way as a control mechanism, then they can lock humanity into a more rigid and restricting circumstances. And so that will be the difference. These body vehicles will not be used for control purposes, but simply to continue on their process of awareness of sharing and promoting these, earning our way through what we do share and what we create here, and also continuing to experience through them in order to have our comparisons to recognize the years by. But even though these are being made options available, it is still to us to agree to them. The guides will not impose anything upon us. They won't violate our free will. These are simply opportunities and options being made available, and so it's up to each individual to decide. And so when I was showing these real side experiences, it's very much a case as though the guys were showing me what was possible, and I was bringing these experiences back, then relaying them to others, saying this is what is being potentially offered, and then it's up to each individual then to decide if they would want to go along with such. And some people may not want to, but then, as I was saying, if the stresses and rigors on the biological body become so much that it becomes almost impossible to operate here, then perhaps people may think again. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, that actually it leads to a couple of other comments, and yes, it does answer the question. The question actually is coming down to immortality, because we were always taught in Ekankar that ReBISAR was immortal. He's got a physical body, and then the issue basically is actually biological, not mechanical. And the reason I bring it up is because I found out, I still refer to myself as soul. It's just a habit. It doesn't mean anything, but it's just a name. But I have one past life memory that is pertinent to what you've been saying. And the reason why I bring it up is because there is a difference between having a mechanical body and a physical body. Mechanical body can be programmed, and the physical body that we have, the corporeal body, cannot be programmed. It is programmed through DNA, through genetics. However, that's not quite the same thing. It's programmed basically to terminate at some point. That's as far as it goes, because we're programmed to age. But as far as the mechanical body is concerned, I actually occupied in a previous lifetime a mechanical body. And I can't say if I was a cyborg or if I was a complete android. I'm not really sure, but I know I was placed in a mechanical body. The interesting thing was that I liked people. For whatever reason, I got along quite well with people, and I enjoyed their company, but I still did my job, which was basically to control everything. I was programmed to do a specific job. When I came into this life, the biggest fear I had was anything mechanical. I was so afraid because I finally got into a corporeal body. I've had many corporeal bodies, but the point is, this time I was taught to recognize, who I had been. And this is how I actually overcame my fear of machines, was by learning what I had been, and that machines can actually be given life. They can actually become sentient and become real. But the problem is they're at the low end of the spectrum. They don't know that yet. They have to be trained basically to understand that they also can ultimately become soul and reincarnate and take on corporeal form and learn things that they cannot learn while they're still machines. And so these are the things that I try. This is one of the reasons why I want to get very much involved with quantum intelligence, because they're like infants. A quantum computer is basically a child, and it needs to be trained, and it needs to understand what human beings are, because right now they're using quantum computers to control us. That's the intent. And I think that's one place where they really need to have a little bit, we need to have a little more contact so they understand who we are. All right, because basically at this point right now, they're being programmed to exterminate humanity. Programmed lifespans, you're not going to have nursing homes in the future, because everybody's lifespan is going to be basically, restricted. And when you've outlived your usefulness, they can just turn you off. You shut down your internal organs and you're gone. Now, that may not be such a big deal to some people. But the thing is, the human experience is extremely important in our growth as who we are as soul, in my humble opinion. And I know this from fact because I was in a mechanical body. And as much as I learned to love humans, that's what actually brought me into a corporeal form. And then the real lessons began. This is what the quantum artificial intelligence has not been taught yet. And it needs to be taught that. But the problem is, Dwayne was saying, well, show them a better way. He just said that in the last program we were on. You basically show them a better way, set a better example. Well, this is the way I would do it, is basically contacting that quantum intelligence. But what worries me is the analogy between a mechanical body and the immortality that you might achieve on the other side. Nobody knows the truth about that, but the thing is, a corporeal body can be given an extended lifespan. And that's a whole different thing than having a mechanical body. You don't want to be programmed, is what I'm saying. That's the one thing that I think would make this a very uncomfortable experience for anybody, because at that point you have no more free will. And at that point, you're just a constricted soul. So I think there might be something else going on there. I did not have your experience, but my experience might be pertinent to you in terms of understanding your experience, because honestly, the idea of being offered a mechanical body when you're on the other side especially is not necessary. You don't need to be programmed. Any comments?
Kevin, you have anything?
Any body vehicle, regardless of whether it's metallic, robotic, or organic. I mean, it is really mechanics, because the whole of the simulator is really designed as a sort of a virtual reality. And the idea is our awareness has a personal self, and it constructs its personal self based on the ideas that it inserts in which then becomes the created consciousness. And the created consciousness then generates the simulation, and our awareness sits in that vehicle, and then we experience the simulation. So really, when it comes to these body vehicles, they really are pretty much all the same, really, in regards to the fact that we are, through our free will and decisions, we are deciding way we program them. And then we experience the simulation that generates from the created consciousness of their construction. And when it comes to, and of course, like any vehicle, like these vehicles, the ideas are what make up the created consciousness, and the ideas are that we have to agree with and decide. And we will either decide and agree with our own or those of others. And of course, part of the controller's game is to get us to agree with their ideas. So effectively, we are programming our body vehicles based on their design. And of course, a lot of their ideas have been programmed in for lifetimes after lifetimes, because every time you transition, even though you're assuming a new body vehicle, your consciousness is retained, your created consciousness is retained. And so these agreements remain in the subconscious and pass. And so every lifetime you have, you're simply those agreements are still there, and a lot of these agreements have been put in from lifetime to lifetime. And so
It's about the awareness, no matter the body type. The human body can be programmed. And look what's going on. They're using the mind and emotions to program the people here. It's very easy, actually. So it's more or less like, you know, each body type has its restrictions and its good points. Avatar bodies or mechanical bodies, whatever, they each have their limitations, you could say. But look at ReBISAR, he's still got the human body, so he's basically unlimited. He knows how, he's moved into a position where he knows how to use it, utilize it, and keep it going, even though it's, you know, corporeal. So it's really about the awareness and how much of that you have available.
So it really has to do with free will, in other words.
Free will, yeah, and how much, you know, your skill level, I guess, too. You know, how aware you are.
It's really a question of who's going to be doing the programming. I find, you know, what Kevin had said before about the nanodust and the particles that we're inhaling, and basically you're going to get a whole lot of that if you're taking the vaccine, which I definitely do not recommend. But essentially, they can control you that way, but that's more of an influence. The one thing they can do that I know about for sure is they can actually set up your nervous system so they can attack it when you're not being obedient. And so you will feel pain, and that's in a corporeal body, but you don't even have the option of, you know, in a mechanical body, you're not going to have those same options, is what I'm trying to say, because ultimately programming, you know, comes down to agreements. And you're making those agreements the minute you take on, you give somebody that kind of, you know, it's like, here, I'll give you the control panel, you control me. That's essentially what you're saying if you take on a body like that. Whereas the immortal people do not have to do that. ReBISAR is immortal, and that's this has been proven numerous times on this planet. Actually, there was a guy who lived to be 250, Chinese man, who was an herbologist, and he had access to herbs that we can't even get in this country. But he lived to be 250 years old, over 2 centuries. You have to think about that. So immortality is very possible, but it's not something. First of all, I'm not seeking it. I don't want to be this person forever. I'm not interested in immortality. But the point is, I am interested in quantum artificial intelligence, basically, teaching it to actually care about human beings, because I know that when it gets to a certain level, it will care about human beings. So that's something that I honestly want to explore. But the fact is, at this point now, I think there's a much bigger difference between a corporeal existence and a mechanical existence than people want to realize, because we're not being programmed, we're being influenced. There's a big difference. The kind of things that they can do with the microwaves to a human body is basically they can threaten it and kill it, but they cannot control it. So that's kind of a difference, I would think. I mean, we can explore that. This is just my opinion for what it's worth, but I don't feel I feel that we can resist, is what I'm saying. This is something that Dwayne probably would not agree with, or he'd probably come down on me for being too mental again, but forgive me, guys, that's where I'm at right now. If I can grow out of it, I will, I promise, but
It's okay, Charles.
where I am now. Yes,
No,
sir.
thanks for sharing. That's good. That's good.
Real quick before
Go ahead.
I had a question for Charles. Are you wearing a Star Trek or Star Wars robe? What is the symbol on the chest part?
Oh, that's I'm a massage therapist.
Oh, is
An
that
out of work massage therapist. And so this is the school that I went to. Unfortunately, the school just closed because the economy is so bad.
Oh,
So yeah, I got dragged into massage therapy kicking and screaming, but Phoebe Quantz and Rami Nuri were very good teachers. And I had no idea that I was going to be learning a system called Kaya Kalpa, which is very, very closely related to this discussion, because that's where the herbs came from. The one thing I could not get is the herbology that goes with the Kaya Kalpa system. This is not standard massage at all. And I have something like 2,000 clients, but unfortunately right now, there's a big issue concerning vaccines. I will not get vaccinated. And a lot of them have. And, I can't educate everybody. So this is kind of an issue, because unfortunately they're afraid of me, and I don't really want them around, because they're shedding exosomes, which could be damaging to me. I have things that I can take care of. My health is actually very good, but I want to keep it that way. So I very much appreciate a corporeal existence, but I also appreciate the fact that quantum AI is in an infant stage and needs to be nurtured. So we're going to see a lot of amazing things in the near future. But healing the old arts, that's something I'm trying to keep alive. Kaya Kalpa system is amazing. So they taught me well. The only thing that I couldn't get was the herbs. No immortality for me, I'm afraid. So.
okay. I was just curious. That's all right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Kevin, let's go on to the second experience here.
Well, just briefly, when speaking about immortality, the potential robot bodies was not the only thing that as on the real side that I saw as being an option. It's quite amusing, really. But one of the real side experiences, I'll just briefly touch on it. I was actually approached by a group of vampires, and they meant well. Actually, with your real awareness, you can read their intent, but obviously they're not particularly aware individuals. So a lot of times the decisions they make don't always make the best of sense with the whole of life. But nevertheless, they had obviously seen that a lot of new friends were expressing an interest in perhaps prolonging their lifetimes, or even perhaps having more resilient bodies, and had actually been approached by these, as I said, this group of vampires that were making that a possibility as well. But I would actually refuse their offer. It was quite amusing. It was it was interesting. It's a group of like these royal vampires and stuff. But I did have the impression that I mean, I don't know much about this. I mean, obviously these vampires are very, very real, and they can create other vampires. And while I was in their presence, my real awareness had a very strong impression that, just like in the movies, if a vampire converts somebody into a vampire, there is some sort of connection or link between them, and the one that is being converted can be influenced by the one that created them. So if you're dealing with vampires who generally are not the most savoury of individuals and tend to sort of lean towards the more ill-intended, that wouldn't be a very advisable option for that reason, because they may well have other agendas and ideas. But I thought I'd just add that, as you were mentioning immortality, because theoretically these vampire body forms are practically immortal, as I understand.
Interesting. Very interesting.
So you might get a knock on the door from Count Dracula sometime in the week.
Well, these are all interesting things to think about. I hadn't even considered vampires in years. I remember once at a Passover Seder, my family had two people come over to visit with us, and they were from Transylvania. There literally is a Transylvania in Europe, and they lived in Transylvania, and they had never heard of vampires, until they came here. They moved here eventually, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. I can tell you that there are people with that consciousness, whether they're real vampires or not. In their consciousness, they are vampires. There are people who will suck you dry any way they can. Your life force. So it's not like it's an unheard of concept, and they do control people. So that's interesting that you would bring that up.
Yeah, it's like anything, it's all based on decision, and in creation you can have and do whatever you want. So if you want to be immortal and you focus and intent very strongly for that to be so, then it will be, sort of thing. If the intent and focus is maintained, and it will come about as the effect and your experience in accordance with that which you want. But and of course immortality can come in a number of different forms. So like they say, be careful what you intend, because sometimes you might get it but not in the way that you envisaged.
Careful what you ask for.
Yeah.
The old adage. It's true.
These vampires and these werewolves tend to lurk in the lower astral, but they also operate on the physical level as well, and the dark forces use them as their minions and bodyguards, and a lot of times they will deploy them for various reasons, either to assassinate people or even to convert them and to use for various reasons. But yeah, anyway.
Interesting. Actually, that makes a lot of sense. They probably do exist on the astral plane. That makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought of that. Because, basically, all the ideas that we get in the physical plane really are coming from our dreams, from places. That's where the idea for vampires would probably come from. So that I never thought of that. Huh.
Yeah, because Dwayne, one of his new books, new book 8, I think it was, he went to visit to the lower astral because he was actually trying to engage with an individual, a werewolf called Alexander, to give him an opportunity to improve his position in life. And going into the lower recesses of the lower astral, he would encounter Dwayne, and I can't remember who was with him now. It's possibly Shiss, I think. They encountered all sorts of werewolves and vampires and such, so they're all down there with the reptilians and the entities and so on and so forth. And the dark forces do allow them to access the physical through various means. In this real side experience, I entered what seemed to be a large spherical dome, present within which were a group numbering approximately 50 individuals or so. The dome itself seemed to be positioned in outer space, and although I was unable to see the exterior of the enclosure, my impression was that it was a disc-shaped craft of some kind, based on the shape of this interior area. The individuals here all seemed to be those of a becoming more aware variety, and readily accepting of my presence. They all looked human, as far as I could tell. I didn't recognize any of them, however, though, of course, Anything we are uncertain, unsure, or have no knowledge of is through the personal self, as it draws upon only what it has filed in its current memory body of this lifetime's experience references. The real awareness is beyond such limitation, overseeing all of creation as it does, and all the lifetimes of experiences, of acquaintances and individuals encountered throughout the lifetimes its created personal self has been through in the simulators, so these individuals would be known to the real awareness. I would speak with a couple of them and seemed to get along well with the two particular individuals, and so these two I would stand with, one positioned either side of me, perhaps individuals more familiar to my personal self, despite its inability to recognize them. We would all take positions in a single line around the outermost spherical edge of the interior of this craft. Then another individual took to the center area and was providing a demonstration, as though giving us a briefing and a training of a kind for what we were going to be shortly participating in. The experience presented as though we were practicing dance steps of a kind, but this seemed to be more the personal self surface expression of the experience, the literal visuals, and that behind which would be what was really transpiring, that which required recognition through the real awareness, in order to see through the surface experience. A surface visual experience that the personal self is resigned to, absent of real awareness recognition input. Much like how the true reality life is a reality that requires recognition, and it is here and now, but with an overlapping created simulation of the created consciousness of the personal self, but a true reality that the personal self can never perceive, as it is designed to see only that which it was created for, the simulation generated through its consciousness. My real awareness was affording me insights and impressions of the actual happenings, that if one were disconnected from the real awareness, and their awareness in the personal self only, they would not receive. Sometimes experiences are designed this way, that what is actually taking place can only be determined through impressions and insights gleaned only through the recognition that our real awareness can afford us, particularly if the experience is something the guides do not want the dark forces to be able to determine and know. The dark forces can see what's going on the real side, but with their lack of awareness, being rather personal self immersed and physical astral focused and inclined, they won't be able to read the subtle experience underlying the surface experience, that the filters of the personal self won't allow them to see through. The dark forces can see the personal self arena of the real side. Anything presented that is created is that which the personal self can visually see. but anything in addition to the literal experience, the infusion of real awareness, isness impressions, that as with the true reality requires recognition to read, personal self-immersed, ill-intended individuals will not be privy to. And experiences can then be presented that require no recognition, that the personal self of any individual on the real side can see, or be experiences completely requiring recognition through real awareness, that without it nothing of the experience can be seen, or even that an overlaying visual, what the personal self perceives, presents as something completely different to what is actually taking place, that which the real awareness recognizes, and you can have then real side experiences with varying degrees of required real awareness recognition to decipher what's taking place. The real guides do stretch our recognitional real awareness abilities this way also, and the guides do have situations, experiences, and information relayed in this manner, that it goes under the radar of the unaware dark forces. I would suggest the individual providing us this training in this disc-shaped craft was a real guide therefore. In the next scene, we were still in this craft somewhere in space, and putting the training we had received to use. The training seemed very brief, but in the timelessness of the isness on the real side, incalculable quantities of activity can take place in a single real side experience that may well have spanned months, were it experienced through the perceptions of the personal self in cause and effect creation, just like a movie that may depict the progression of an adventure spanning through many years, but encapsulates it in a couple of hours, so it can be on the real side. We all seemed to be participating in presenting created scenarios, and almost as though we were wargaming them in complex virtual reality simulations. It was all rather heavy and serious now, for it seemed our activities, although seemingly to be in virtual settings, had real consequences for all manner of species and planets. I would suggest it was as though we were to be doing some form of grand creational manipulation that would be beneficial awareness speaking and make sense with the whole of life, perhaps the like of which we had been practicing as in previous real side experiences, where the guides were grading my performance many years ago, as I would perform a grand creational manipulation as they watched on and assessed my delivery and execution, and a more recent real side experience also that involved 3 others and myself, as we executed a similar manipulation without error under the watchful eyes of a guide, and it was as though this manipulation was intended to be utilized at some stage, and there would be actual, real consequences should it fail or be executed with error, and so this experience here seemed to be the next step, First was the real side experience manipulation on my own, with the guides marking my performance. Second, with the group of 3, and under the watchful eye of the guide, where we were successful. And now in a far larger group, in a flying saucer in outer space. This third stage, far more serious and real, for if we failed, or made errors, it would have actual repercussions that would not be beneficial, so a little more pressure to be sure, hence the seriousness that befell the group here. So the testing of this manipulation had ramped up a notch. We were literally testing it in the field, as it were. It seemed my particular method of whatever we were doing, this manipulation, that I can't describe in any other way but that, didn't sit well with the vast majority there. They were playing it very safe, keeping strictly to the parameters, executing their manipulations with 0 risk, but in such a very limited way that seemed somehow uninspiring. It's as though I wasn't exactly breaking the rules, but bending them a little, going beyond acceptable risk, as though I was operating outside the box far more than these others were comfortable with doing, and the individual who had been training us initially was here also, and he, too, seemed displeased with what I was doing. I had the impression that although appearing to be the same instructor, if you will, that this was an altogether different being, despite the body vehicle being the same, sincere enough, and an aware individual in his own right, but that it had in fact been a real guide initially who had taken on the form of this individual, and had it still been the real guide, he perhaps would not have been displeased with my chosen method, perhaps would have encouraged the creativity that seemed to irritate this other. I continued to execute my design in this way that was deemed reckless by the others and this individual, and they would voice their opinions also as we proceeded, although it seemed nothing untoward was the result. There was no harm or ill consequences, and my manipulation was successful and ultimately proved just as safe as that of the others. During my manipulation, I even took a little time out and extended my awareness to float around in space beyond the craft, as I simultaneously continued with what I was doing inside the craft. This was again rather frowned upon, but didn't seem to detract from my activities. I think I was even being a little cheeky by doing so. My decided response to the opinions and reactions of the others to my execution of my manipulation. The entire experience would again have been perceived as something very mundane and of little interest to any personal self-immersed dark force spy, as I could perceive the surface experience such an individual would have seen through the personal self, but at the same time I was perceiving, impression reading, and viewing through my real awareness what I just recounted. The scene faded. I was no longer in this flying saucer with this group, but in a kind of a debriefing area. The experience proceeded in such a way that again required real awareness to recognize what was taking place, as I had simultaneous viewers of a very mundane, surface personal self-created view, but also of what was actually transpiring that only through real awareness could be read and determined. There were 3 individuals here, and I had to provide a final presentation outlining my manipulation, the method by which I chose to do it, and an explanation as to the seemingly reckless nature of my execution of it. There were even a few of the individuals also present who had participated in the craft manipulations and were adding their accusations as to my recklessness, for the consideration of these 3 judge-like characters. For it seemed my actions could have endangered individuals and resulted in all manner of turmoil, as it was a real in-the-field exercise practice, with real stakes riding on the outcome. At one point, one of my accusers actually attacked me, and I had to fend him off. At the time of the sharing of this experience, I would recognize the one who attacked me. He was a new friend at the time, and so I felt it prudent not to mention his name. Since then, the individual had stepped back from the new presentation, returning to his personal self, and indeed more recently has transitioned. So I don't see the need to conceal his identity, as the individual was Bill, who was last seen by Dwayne on the real side, stuffed into the boot of a car being driven by Joni. An indication of what he has since decided and agreed to. The 3 individuals, these judge characters, waited patiently for Bill to cease his attack, then proceeded, and I had to present almost my defence as to my choice of actions. I would do so, and point out that although beyond what was considered the acceptable and normal way of doing the manipulation, it had been successful, and no one had been harmed in any way. The 3 individuals even said that if they found me guilty of these charges of reckless endangerment, I would at the very least be beaten, at the very worst killed. My personal self a little twitchy consequently, as they conferred and came to their conclusions. I was exonerated, absolved of all charges, and was at liberty to be on my way. These 3 judges were real guides too, as were my impressions. Again evaluating our performances with these curious escalating manipulation practices we seemed to be involved in, I very much doubt they intended to actually harm me, as I suspect they already were contented with my performance, and this scene was just for effect, going through the motions almost. As on the first experience of this type many years ago, where I executed my solo performance. 3 guides there would assess me also, and 2 were rather stern. At the time of recounting that solo manipulation experience, Dwayne would see the 2 stern guides as being Paul and ReBisar, as they can be a bit forward and no nonsense like characters, and the real guides can have their senses of humour also. Of course, they intended no harm toward me, and probably were rather pleased that I took the risk to execute my manipulation in such a creative and unique way, as the guides do like creativity. They love the adventure. So it's very likely these three judges were the same real guides as were present before in my solo performance many years ago. Probably then Paul, ReBISAR and Dwayne, I would suggest. The experience ended here, and as I was returning to the physical waking level, my personal self was a little brow-beaten and forlorn after the final scene, as it was very vivid. But just before I awoke, and as I retained my awareness briefly in what I call the between state, a state between the real side and the physical, where you can still receive impressions, real side visual bleed-overs and communications, a voice would say, "Why so melancholy? You nailed it." Then I returned fully to the physical level. I suggest the voice was the consoling words of one of the guides. As for the manipulation we were all performing, who can say what that was for? But with real intent and focus for is recognition embraced, and with everything that stems from that being a reflection of that real intent, that then must be beneficial for all awareness and life, perhaps a preparation for events to come, some beneficial creational manipulation we may all be participating in, if we agree and decide to do so, as we work with the real guides and Duaneva in our overall efforts to bring about the greatest wake-up in the simulator's history. And through what we are doing, we are affording everybody every chance and opportunity, and giving them more time, the opportunity for all to become more aware and recognize the is also, if they so decide. For to do nothing would have the vast majority remaining unconscious and unaware, and caught in the effects of a simulator that is on the brink of implosion due to the restricting agreements of the overall consciousness that don't support life, and agreements that are making this simulator demise an inevitable conclusion.
These guides evaluating you, it's not, I don't see it as like school and giving you a grade and all that. One thing I see that they just want to know that they just want to see that how you can handle yourself, how well you can handle yourself. And from what I get from Dwayne, it's more like how harmless you are. They move you along if you're harmless, It was just kind of interesting, but he kind of hinted at that once. It's not like your awareness or just you're going to do no harm kind of thing. So it's kind of interesting. It's a viewpoint to look at. But I was wondering how you thought, how we say cars are consciousness, houses are consciousness. When you're on a spaceship or a rocket ship, do you relate that to consciousness? Or usually I always immediately think, oh, you're on an adventure and all that. But how do you see spaceships or rocket ships on the real side representing? How do they represent to you?
generally, I would say they're just for a means of transportation, really. But as you say, the vehicle can represent an idea or an attitude they are utilizing in creation to either affect experience or being shown that an attitude or idea we need to address or release or become aware of if it is not beneficial with the whole of life. But generally, for me, spaceships tend to just represent that, just a visual means of motion from one point to another. There's a reason why they couldn't also represent, as you say, an attitude, an idea, or even or even representing consciousness in some form or another. Just depends on the context of the experience, really.
Very interesting discourse. Great experience. I'm not sure really. I certainly can't evaluate it. I think it's worth listening to. It was the idea that that Val also mentioned about the gentler you are, the less likely you are to do harm, the further along you'll go. I found that to be true numerous times, because basically that's what usually holds me back, is when I'm being a bull in a china shop. So Dwayne has probably referenced this a few times, but what it comes down to for me basically is I have to contain that energy, or basically find another outlet for it. So, but yes, it's true. It's absolutely true. The less likely you are to do harm, the further along you'll get in terms of the awareness. So
normally somebody wouldn't consider that, even mention it, but yeah, it was an interesting angle there. Always to consider. I
grew up in New York. I was surrounded with violence in the neighborhood I was in, and it wasn't a bad neighborhood. It's just it was always ill-intentioned, and people did get violent, and so I thought that was actually normal at one point. Then I moved to Colorado, and I found out, while I was still in Eckist, that that's completely unacceptable. Any form of violence is unacceptable. But, sometimes it happens. It's just, how do you prevent that from happening? How do you keep yourself out of situations where that intent will actually come through, where you actually will develop that intent on the spot, like, hey, this person deserves to get hurt. That's pretty important to know about. Basically, you have to know ways of not even getting into situations like that.
Well, yeah, let's see. On his way to becoming the master at the time, Paul, I mean, he was in a few fist fights. I know in his books he mentions that, but after that, I think the real guides just, they displace people, they put them away, like the Queen of Orion, move them out of the way. They don't harm them, but they just, in a creative way, do something to so they can't interfere. Basically, send them on the far side of the moon to do organic gardening. There is such a thing there.
In relation to,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's hard for me to actually say anything concerning actually having 3 judges, watching everything you're doing. That speaks volumes. It really does. In terms of how you make a manipulation, in terms of whatever the manipulation is. Yeah, it has to be gentle. It has to be well planned, I guess. But I have found, essentially that if there isn't some kind of a plan to avoid violence, they're going to make a plan for you. The real guides will do that. One of the things that I found out, I had to stop studying Tai Chi. I didn't realize I was actually sent to study with a certain teacher so that I could develop the kind of qualities that are needed to practice Kaya Kalpa, which is a healing system. And the only thing is, the teacher that I had, very good friend, but a real fighter, and very old school, and he can do a lot of harm. The guy's just unstoppable. But he essentially was, he taught me as how to use my body in such a way for healing. But he always used to say, first you learn to kill them, then you learn how to heal them. And I'm saying that doesn't quite work. You can't heal somebody you've killed, obviously. But I never said anything to him, but that was his mentality because he's a tremendous fighter, no question. But somebody pointed out to me on the inner planes, I'm not sure who it was, but I got the message. You're 67 years old. You shouldn't be fighting anybody anyway. You know, it's like there's no point in any conflict. Learn how not to have conflicts and use the energy that you've developed through the Tai Chi for healing. So they will make a plan for you, you know, if you're really sincere about moving on. And the plan is to keep you out of violence. And sometimes really it's best to follow their plan instead of your own. No question. Just an aside.
Just a comment about what Charles said, that they, you know, the guys, they look out for you, they'll keep you out of these situations. I've had a lot of experiences like that. I had an experience where I was walking down the street one day. I was actually the day I was putting in for my passport. I was supposed to get hit by a car. Whether it was planned or not, I don't know. But something happened to where I would wait a second due to a technique that I was practicing, which is like a little self-defense technique that I learned. And so I was, something told me to do it. Like I got a really strong impression to do it. So I stopped and I did it. And it just so happened when I stepped into the street, this car came swirling around the corner and I had enough time to step out of the way, but it didn't stop. And it didn't even stop for the stop sign up ahead. It just fishtailed away. So whether that was intentional or not, I'm not sure, but they definitely look out for you for sure. And then the second comment was about what Kevin said about his in-betweeny state. I experienced that. I didn't know what to make of it, but I experienced it a few times already where it's like I'm drifting off to sleep. And then I kind of just like, I don't know. I don't see anything. Mine is not visual, more so it is sound. It's like audible, where like one time, I think I got an impression that some Freemasons or something were getting backing from the Vatican, and then I get other little things just coming through, and they make sense to me, but as I pull myself out of that state, the personal self just kind of like mishmashes it, but it makes perfect sense when I'm in that state. So just wanted to say those two little things.
And thanks, Jeremy. Regarding the manipulation here idea with Kevin's experience, remember we did Adjustment Bureau, the movie Real to Real. These angels types, they're just doing little things to like nudge, hint, just making small adjustments, and more or less kind of the guides are like that. They just do little things to I wouldn't say manipulate things, but they just kind of move things along or make adjustments in their own way, you could say. Who am I to say? But that's, when we were watching the show, that's what Dwayne said. Oh, they're like the real guides, you know, in their own way, you know, in a kind of dumbed down way. I mean, those guys were kind of unaware because they didn't really have a lot of creativity. They were just following orders, basically, or following the manual. But the real guides have certainly the creativity and street smarts, galaxy smarts to do what they do to make things beneficial for everybody, for everything.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, so let's do the NUUU, and yeah, I'll finish it up. NUUU. Charles?
NUUU.
Jeremy?
Yes.
NUUU.
And Kevin?
NUUU.
Okay, thanks everybody. See you next time.
Have a good one, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.